bit frozen, so I can't actually tell if I'm muted or not.
Yes, we can.
Okay, sweet. Cool, yeah. I'll start. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm Vivian Zhong. I'm a PhD student at Stanford in Bioengineering, and I'm a member of Scientists Speak Up. And I'm going to be your moderator for this panel, best as I can with a frozen screen. And so we are a Stanford student organization with a mission to train students and scientists who effectively communicate and advocate around controversial scientific topics, such as vaccines and climate change. And we've hosted many workshops and panels on science communication in the past, but this is the first time we've had one focused on communication via social media platforms. It's also the first time that we've gone live on Twitch, courtesy of Will. So today we will have a panel with 3 different Stanford scientists who are using social media to reach a wide audience. And next week we will have a follow-up with a workshop on combating science misinformation through social media, led by Mallory. And so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. So first we have Julia Bowman. Julia is a first-year PhD student in Stanford genetics. And during the early days of the pandemic, Julia became inspired to counter COVID disinformation by creating short, digestible science videos on TikTok. And since then, her channel's focus has broadened to include explanations of topics in genetics and biotech, with a following of over 20,000 people. Next, we also have Will Yu. He's a first-year bioengineering PhD student at Stanford, and he's interested in working on tissue engineering strategies for treatment of diseases in cartilage and bone. And before that, Will actually worked for 3 years as a physics instructor at Phillips Academy, where he developed a passion in education and the communication of science. And Will is a partner streamer on Twitch with nearly 12,000 followers. And finally, we have Dr. Ben Rang. Ben is a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford, working with Dr. Robert Malenka, where he investigates how social experiences in early life shape the development of the brain. And Ben shares educational science videos on TikTok, Instagram, Bilibili, which is like Chinese YouTube, and Ibble, to a collective audience of more than 800,000 subscribers. And in these videos, Ben shares breaking scientific discoveries, debunks viral videos containing misinformation, and teaches fundamental neuroscience principles, and imparts on his audience the importance of scientific research. And if we are ready to go, how are we doing on the screen share?
Well, definitely I can play my own. So
okay, sweet. Do you want to start by doing that? We'll have a demo from each panelist. So they're going to show you a piece that they've made and then walk you through their content creation process. You can start, and the audience can feel free to start submitting questions for the Q&A anytime they like.
And so just to give a little bit of context about the video I'm going to play, this is one of my TikToks. I'm just going to play about a minute of it. It's actually like 2 minutes long, but this is a video about a paper in the gene editing field that was published kind of toward the end of last year. And the reason I chose to play this video of all of them is that I think it's an example of a really complex topic doing really well on TikTok. So as I'll explain later, part of the reason I wanted to get into this is so that I could introduce people to concepts in my field that they may not be familiar with, and make it interesting to them, and help them gain a little bit of like a surface level understanding at the very least, so that they can go in and do more investigation themselves to learn more about it. So anyway, this video did well, and so I'll show you kind of the level of technicality.
There's a newly discovered gene editing system, and it might be better for gene therapies than anything we currently have. This is another paper from Feng Zhang's lab, which is kind of on a roll right now. Anyway, to put this paper into context, let's talk about CRISPR for a second. So in case you haven't heard, CRISPR-Cas9 is a gene editing system now commonly used in research and in some therapeutics. The system is derived from bacteria, which use it as a defense against invading viruses. It takes DNA from a virus's genome and then uses that to recognize invading viruses' DNA so that it can be cut up. But here's a question. Where did Cas9 come from? Because proteins evolve over time with organisms, so surely there are earlier versions of Cas9 in the evolutionary record, right? And if you could find those earlier versions of Cas9, maybe they would also be useful DNA cutters. Well, another group had previously postulated that Cas9 was derived from this protein called ISCB because it has a similar sequence. But no one really understood what ISCB does or how it evolved into this programmable CRISPR system where the DNA cutting enzyme is guided to a target site by an RNA. So to try to answer these questions, the researchers looked at all the ISCB genes across the bacterial evolutionary tree. And to summarize a lot, they found that many ISCB genes are associated with an RNA. They call this associated RNA an omega.
Okay, I'll
Wait,
just.
don't stop, Julia. It's so good. It's so good. Can you play it to the
If
end?
you want, I can. Okay, there's
Please,
not that much left.
please.
Okay,
It's so
one more
good.
minute.
And omega RNAs were often found right next to the ISCB gene. And this is what it looks like. It has all these loops that can help RNAs bind to specific proteins. And it also had this one sequence that tended to be pretty different across ISCB genes. And so this part was thought to be a guide that could lead the ISCB and omega RNA pair to a DNA target to cut. So they confirmed that this ISCB system is capable of cutting DNA at sequences specified by the omega RNA, meaning it's functionally similar to CRISPR. Here we see an ISCB system successfully producing edits in several target genes in human cells, albeit at pretty low efficiencies. So given the low efficiency, why is this exciting? Well, ISCB is much smaller than Cas9. It's about 30% the size. That's a really useful quality for genome editing in organisms because it's generally easier to get smaller cargos into cells. And the lower editing efficiency isn't necessarily a cause for concern because these editing systems can be engineered to have greater efficiency. This was done with CRISPR-Cas9 and its derivative systems, and the authors of this paper suggest that it can be done again for ISCBs. So anyway, I'm really excited to see how ISCBs are further developed for editing in human cells and whether they can improve gene therapies.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. So Vivian, did you want me to explain my process now, or is that a later thing?
Yeah, go.
Okay.
Yes, go.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. So I guess, yeah, my process of making new videos is first starting with coming up with the topic. So there are lots of different sources for topics. Sometimes they're just an exciting new paper like this one that I think the world should know about. It should be broken down into ways that everybody can understand because it's definitely doable. Sometimes it's another piece of good SciComm, like Nature and Science put out these really good SciComm articles sometimes. And so using some of their ideas can be helpful in video form. Sometimes I'll just talk to my mom about like trying to figure out what a layperson's misconceptions about my field are. That's actually one of my best sources, I think. Yeah, and so once I've chosen a topic, then I have to do a bunch of research. The amount of research depends on how well I already understand the thing, but if it's reading a new paper or understanding like an adjacent field takes a really long time sometimes. But that's fun. I'll just do a bunch of reading of papers, reviews, and also kind of trying to explain what I've learned to other people to make sure that I understand it well and that it makes sense to them. And then I'll write a script and I'll kind of try to like reconstruct my own process of understanding the concepts and put those into the simplest form of text that I possibly can. And then kind of do this iterative process of like showing it to people who probably aren't in science. That's ideal. And seeing what is confusing to them and trying different ways of explaining things to figure out how I can make the most sense. And once I have that, I'll choose some images to go in the background of my video. And sometimes I'll make my own images in Illustrator or Biorender or something that can be super helpful. Yeah, and then record and edit. And so I guess the whole thing altogether takes at a minimum about 3 hours. Sometimes it can take like up to 8. Depends on how complicated the subject is and how little I know to begin with. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Actually, 3 to 8 hours actually sounds really efficient considering how much work I imagine goes into it.
Incredibly efficient. What? Crazy. That's
For a
wild.
minute of video, it feels like too much, but yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. Are you able to
could-
play
oh.
Will's? Okay, sweet. Yeah.
It's a newly discovered gene editing system, and it might be
How do I?
Should I just comment really quick? Someone in the, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Someone in the chat, Krishana, said, awesome TikTok. I know pieces around 60 seconds tend to do well because of attention spans. Considering this video is greater than or longer than 1 minute, speaks to how interesting the content is. And I think that's really important point. You know, TikToks you typically see when on your For You page with millions of likes and so are like 25 seconds long. You know, so with these longer and like information dense videos, you know, it takes a lot more. I think the odds are sort of stacked against us to go viral. So when they do, it is really satisfying and you get the chance to educate, which is the whole point. So
Yeah.
and I just want to say I loved when you said in the beginning, you're like, oh, it's from this person's lab, and they're kind of on a roll right now. I really like that because that's such like a science conversation thing you would have that like the general public wouldn't understand, but it was cool to include.
Thank you. Yeah, and also to the earlier point about content length, I recently learned that TikTok actually prioritizes videos based on just like how much overall viewership they get. So if you have a long video that people want to keep watching, that's actually going to get prioritized over these super short ones that lots of people like. So yeah, you can have an advantage in presenting a lot of information as long as the information is interesting.
I think that's where you do an amazing job, Julia, of condensing all of that into such a snappy 2 minutes. That's
Thank
incredible.
You so much. Yeah, so it looks like I don't have permission for I don't know whose video this
I think
is.
that's mine coming up now. So let me see if literally right now I can get that to you. And if not, then
try to
I just want to say I love the back and forth that we had from all the panelists right there.
okay. All right, I'm literally going to be sending a share to you right now. I don't know if that works. I can also screen share my own right now.
Yeah, that might be best, Will.
Okay, let me try that. Sharing my screen over here and share sound. All right. And can y'all see that all right? All right, perfect. Let me just quickly do a little adjustment. And all right, so as a little bit of a background for this guy, I think I'm nicely sandwiched in between two amazing polished creators of Ben and Julia. My process on Twitch is a little bit more, how would I put this? It's a little more ADHD, I would say, where in general with a chat that's moving with all sorts of ideas and topics that very often get tangents going all sorts of way where, you know, after 30, 45, an hour, you realize, oh, wait, we kind of strayed pretty far from our original topic. I thought that the best way to kind of give an insight into what my communication of science looks like on Twitch and generally what I do on Twitch is just to give a little bit of a channel trailer. And so I worked with one of my good friends, Roscoe Mander here on editing this this little guide together. So this is a little insight over what you can expect in perhaps an average Twitch stream. So let me play this here. My name is Will. What's up? I'm Will. My name is Will. I'm Will UTV. Don't call me Bill until I'm 60. I attend Stanford University doing my PhD in bioengineering. And my research is in tissue engineering. No, not like Kleenexes, but like organs. Can we cut that last minute? And I'm here talking about, can I get a drum roll, please, chat? Race the crab. Conquering procrastination, enforce your boundaries. Dismantling disinformation. I'm gonna do a little spin. Whee! Climate change, inertia. Boss it. Bidday seat. Is that pizza I smell? Oh! I'm an idiot! Oh! Oh! Yeah, so that's a little bit of my a little channel trailer here, I suppose, of what we do on my stream. And yeah, we will do sometimes just chatting segments where I'll literally just be talking with my chat. There will be some times where we'll be playing games like Pokemon or Valorant or things like that. Occasionally we'll do podcast segments with other guests. And a really fun thing that we did recently was take one of our workshops from Scientists Speak Up of dismantling disinformation, and I applied it to kind of give a lecture to my Twitch chat here. because I think that there are so many important conversations we had around science that can either be into the nitty gritty of it, which is something that I think Julia and Ben do extremely well. And there's also many messages around the communication of science and misinformation that don't necessarily require a high level understanding of the scientific processes that are going on, and instead captures the idea of how do we communicate science and how can we bring in empathy and understanding one another's values to try and target misinformation and specifically specific disinformation tactics from other agencies that have a in their own corporate or specific interest in having misinformation out there. So that's a little bit about my Twitch streams here.
I thought that was absolutely incredible. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed that. It brought me a great deal of joy.
Thank you so much.
It exemplifies the difference between, like Julia's content and mine, where we're, it's like we have a tiny little window of people's attention, where Twitch is such a different streaming platform where it's like you're expected to be there for a while, like you are sitting down for a long conversation. And so you have all the liberty to talk a little bit about something and move on to the next topic and then come back. And I think that's great. And unless others have questions, I would like to ask, and I'm assuming that people in the audience would be interested in this too. It's like, what advice could you give for people that want to start Twitch streams? Like, how did you get going? And I don't know, I guess kind of like, I'm in your Twitch stream right now and you have this amazing audience that everyone's like saying all these awesome things and it's so much fun in here. I can assume that when someone like starts up and like hits stream right now, it's going to be like no one's in there. So what kind of advice could you give?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that it's very difficult to get started without a pre-existing audience, but I think that's something that you two have built as a really big advantage. I think that naturally it's the most challenging to build an audience through live streaming, but it can be an amazing way to engage with a pre-existing audience that you bring on over. And so I think that just almost like in research, how it can be a very lonely experience, kind of being in the lab late hours on your own. But what gets us through are our lab mates, the connections that we make along the way, being able to share our science and talk with other people. I think the exact same advice applies in streaming, where rely on your network and rely on people. And oftentimes as scientists, one of the most important thing is how we advertise ourselves and our science, and whether or not we can catch someone else's attention with what we're doing, and being able to get started with already some of your peers being willing to support you on that day one stream can be an awesome way just to like kind of boost some of that visibility. I think having some kind of pre-planned topics that you'd like to talk about or an activity to base your stream around can be a fantastic way to get started. And then with just like it is on, well, I guess TikTok is kind of magical because there's always a chance of a viral video coming out. But I think for anyone trying to break into this TikTok space, I think their advice I hear a lot of times is that consistency is oftentimes key. And it's not like every video, especially banger videos, will go viral. Sometimes something that you put in so much effort in, anything is just like chef's kiss, will still just not get the eyes that it deserves on it. But that's why we just continue to go live, continue to make those videos. And I think that's how I would suggest getting started, is first making sure you have a lot of like people willing to be in your chat and watch you from day one, and rely on your network of people in that space. And then plan around content. You don't have to go for too long, but just kind of like consistently showing up is oftentimes like the absolute key to or towards some growth.
Thank you so much, Will. I guess a quick question, if I may, Bill, Ben, before you go, quick question for Will, since we've been talking about like all the challenges. Was there ever any point when you wanted to give up, when you thought like, when you put in a lot of effort and got no views, and what got you through that?
Yeah, so when I first got started, I had no idea what I was doing. This was back in 2017. I just graduated from undergrad and was in the middle between thinking about applying to grad school, wanting to apply for medical school, being not quite sure on what path I'm going down. And I started streaming just because I grew up playing video games, and I knew of Twitch as a space where people gamed and shared their gaming experience with others. So that way it could be kind of like a group, how fun a group board game session can be. That's kind of the similar environment that you can get on Twitch by streaming yourself playing games. And so when I first got started, maybe I spent the first like 4 or 5 months with an average viewership of 3. And I think 2 of those 3 were me on my own computer with my stream up, and me on a laptop with another stream up. And the one person I'd be playing a game with because I'd beg them to open this up. And so it like definitely took quite a long time on that process. And so I think for someone interested in getting into the space, it's a little bit hard going in with expectations of having like, a big audience around you. And so I think the best habit you can get into is, no matter how many people are watching you, are you doing something that you think provides value? Are you putting on a show of some sorts, or doing something that you would want to personally watch yourself maybe? And I think that as long as you can do that, you'll continually like improve in the process and find people around. So I think there were quite a lot of times where I found myself being like, maybe this isn't the best use of my time. But in the end, I realized that I wasn't necessarily doing this to grow on Twitch or to make Twitch something bigger. It was mainly just because when I was on Twitch streaming, I was doing something I already enjoyed. It was already provided value without an audience. I think that's what ends up growing your audience along the way.
That was really inspiring, Will. Thank you so much. All right, Ben, do you want to round us off?
Yes, and I'll just add on to Will's point, which I think this is important to note, is like that struggle you described, everyone kind of goes through that when they start off. And I think it's really important and helpful to understand the platform you're using. I think that anybody who's, here and is interested in getting into science communication, but doesn't really know where to start, the biggest tip I can give is like, start on a platform that you understand. If you have an Instagram and you use that Instagram all the time and you understand how to post and upload, start there. Don't try going on to Twitch or on a TikTok, an app you've never been on before. You could try it if you want, but it's basically going to be easiest if you're using something you already know. So, and you also understand like the engagement and how videos do well and things like that, like how do you gain a following? So you always have to think about the platform, and for Will, it was persistence. I'm glad it paid off. And by the way, completely unrelated, I mentioned earlier that it's going to get dark. I'm sitting outside. Soon I'm going to be sitting here in candlelight like I'm in the 1600s. So forgive me for my increasingly spooky backdrop. But yeah, I think unless anyone has any comments, feel free to just start off with the video on the left. I'm not in control of the screen.
Yeah, I shared over here. Good to go?
Yeah. Oh,
All
actually,
right,
you know what? Let me just, sorry, quick preface. My videos in general, for anyone who hasn't seen them, which I assume is pretty much everyone, I usually take 60 seconds or so to just walk through a scientific topic in lay terms. These are the debunking videos where, a video goes viral. Like the 2 images you see here are 2 viral videos that I chose to kind of address. And I'm kind of, what you're about to watch is a lot goofier than my typical content, but I'll touch on, my feelings about misinformation and how to address it afterwards. So yes, please, Will, go ahead and play that one.
All right.
You activate this little badass, you will boost the fuck out of your immune system.
Okay, first off, language. Ma'am, this is a science channel. Pineal gland is very mysterious, so let's go through all this.
It's shaped like a pine cone.
This is absolutely true, and in fact, that's how it was named. Here it is in real life. This is a human pineal gland from the Institute of Human Anatomy.
You will boost the fuck out of your immune system and have a brain orgasm.
Okay, we're starting to get a little bit questionable. So the pineal gland does produce melatonin, which plays a role in immunity. So technically, it could boost your immune system, but the braingasm, we'll get to that. Also, she says that you can use breathing and meditation exercises to push cerebrospinal fluid up into your pineal gland and activate it. So the whole brain is bathed in cerebrospinal fluid, and it preferentially fills these ventricles throughout the brain. The pineal gland is primarily regulated by light, and to my understanding, you're not able to squirt your cerebrospinal fluid into a target by breathing. And I'm sorry, but if you disagree, try it.
When pressure is applied, you create an external electromagnetic field. You become a magnet to all the good shit you desire.
Okay, now we're getting a little bit less scientific here. For lack of a better explanation, there's no evidence for that. Now, I'd like to talk in much greater detail about this idea of a braingasm, so watch out for a second video.
Okay, so I meant to cut out. First off, I'm sorry for the language. I completely forgot that video had so much swearing in it. But as you can see in that video, I think when you're addressing misinformation like this, where this creator made a video saying, a lot of things that are wrong about the pineal gland, and someone who is prone to watching that full video or the original video and believing it is very unlikely to sit and watch me explain deeply scientific, evidence-backed rebuttal, basically. And especially if I'm framing it as, why don't you sit here and listen to me for the next 60 seconds, explain why she's wrong and why everything that you believe is wrong. Nobody wants to hear that. So my approach to targeting misinformation and kind of providing a rebuttal like this is to include as much entertainment and humor as I can. And I wanted to show this video because although it's quite extreme, there's a lot of, goofiness and swearing in this one, but it's not the type of, boring scientific content, because the whole goal, in my opinion, is to attract the people who are vulnerable to misinformation and then get them to ultimately believe that they are actually misinformed. So the second video on the right is different. It's sort of just, I just wanted to include this video because I really like it. I'm not like directly addressing misinformation. I sort of am. I'm just kind of talking broadly about like people on social media and Google and like where people can be misled. But I really like the message of this video. So I just wanted to share it. So please, Will, go ahead.
All right.
Nothing that an expert knows that you cannot learn from the.
So I've already been blocked by this creator for debunking one of her videos that was false. But let's talk about this one. She says that there is nothing that an expert knows that you can't learn on the internet. And before you swipe away, you probably think I'm going to say, nope, she's wrong. I'm an expert. She's not. I win. But no, actually, what she says is true. Let's say you want to learn all about plasticity in the brain, but you don't want to go to college or do a PhD or any of that. You can go on the internet to PubMed, which is a database of scientific articles, search synaptic plasticity, and have all 67,000 scientific published articles at your disposal. And if you have the diligence to sit and read all or some of these papers, then you can learn about this topic. But here's the problem. You sit down, you start reading, and you quickly discover that you don't know what AMPA-type glutamate receptors are. And none of these diagrams make any sense. And you just might say, oh, these damn scientists, they make everything so complicated so that nobody can understand it. And look, is that a real problem that this is uninterpretable if you're not a scientist? I mean, yeah, I think so. I do think that science needs to be more accessible and clear, and I sincerely hope that my videos can contribute to that. But the reason that you don't understand this isn't because it's designed to be too complicated. It's because biological systems, like the bodies that we inhabit or the brains in our head, are just naturally extremely complex. The way that our brains, for instance, work is not simple. And unfortunately, it just takes a lot of formal training before anyone can understand something like this. So when she says that anyone can learn about anything on Google, she's not wrong, but the person that's doing the Googling needs to understand that there are limitations in their ability to interpret the information that they find. And if that person finds themselves in a situation where they don't fully understand, they need to be willing to accept that and continue searching, instead of making an assumption about it that could be wrong and then continuing to believe that thing. Or maybe even worse, talking about it on social media and spreading it as if it's true. There is nothing more dangerous when it comes to misinformation than a person who refuses to accept that they don't understand something.
Okay, so sorry, that one was a little bit long. Thank you. Thank you for the applause. And I was gifted, the patio light was turned on for me, so we are a little bit better now. So just a few points that I wrote down before this that I want to highlight, I guess, in regard to all this, is when you're doing debunking, when you're creating videos, I think it's important to start with a catchy intro, especially on TikTok. Audience retention past the first few seconds is really important for your video to do well. So like I said, I never start with, let me explain why they're wrong. I usually start with like something catchy, or actually in both of these cases, I sort of like offered a bone. Like in the pineal gland, I'm like, she says that it's shaped like a pine cone. She's absolutely right. And I started off by supporting their claims. And same thing with the other one where I'm like, she says that you can find everything on the internet and she's totally right. But then I kind of like reframe it in a way where it's like, that may be true, but like a lot of the other stuff is false. And I think it's important to know your audience. In this case, again, my audience is those who are vulnerable to this type of misinformation, and to feed that audience a little bit. Because if you just completely negate everything, you're going to lose them. And so I think a little bit of humor is okay. Being gentle is important and respectful, because at the end of the day, I think being hostile will only exacerbate the division between those who trust science and those who do not. So I always try to be respectful sometimes, usually.
And I really love these videos, especially the second one. I think it's like so great that you're probably going to like help people understand a concept bigger than just, you know, debunking one piece of misinformation. So I was so happy when I saw this. A question, do you know if you are more likely to reach the people who watch the original video if you are replying to it? Like, are you probably going to target the exact audience that you want to target just by doing a reply?
No, I think you're actually like more likely to reach the opposite audience.
Really? Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, TikTok is completely random. The only way to really direct your videos at an audience, as far as I understand, is with a hashtag. So, but TikTok like knows what your video contains. You know, if I'm skateboarding in one of my videos, I don't have to put hashtag skateboarding. It knows I'm skateboarding and it'll show it to people who like skateboarding videos. So in this case, I'm not sure how much like word analysis it does, where it's like it knows that I'm disagreeing with her or that I'm talking about science. But I don't think that it's any more likely to be shown to the people who saw the original video, unfortunately, because that, of course, that's who needs it most. And also an important note is that, you know, I always address viral videos. And I describe that, or I define that as like anything with more than like 25,000 likes. But, you know, sometimes they're super viral, they get millions and millions of likes, and there's absolutely no hope that my video will reach that many people. So you just kind of have to go in knowing like you're going to lose overall the numbers game, but if you can redirect some of that thinking to a more accurate position, then you're doing something right.
Yeah, funny enough, that second TikTok was my first Dr. Brain video that appeared on my own For You page. And I love that idea as well. It's, I think, so critical towards our mission at like Scientists Speak Up as well, is this idea that all this research is out there, but your interpretation of these factual information can be so swung in different directions. And being able to have a proper guiding force along that is so important. And yeah, just a huge shout out to you two again for doing such good work on that front.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's especially important. I mean, I was just talking to Mallory before about this, but like, if you're watching the news and there's a bar graph, right, and it's like whatever, it's showing some important metric that you should care about on the news, and they say like, look at this bar graph, it shows this. Most people won't even look at the bar graph. They'll just listen to whatever's being told, and then they might look at the bar graph and be like, wait a minute, that doesn't look like what they said, but they said it, so they must be right. You know, like you can have evidence supporting the fact that they are wrong right in front of you, and most people will still just believe what people say due to you know, the sheer confidence through which it comes out. So, you know, I think it's important to train people to interpret, to locate and interpret data. And I think it's important to make people aware of, you know, these kind of things that can happen where someone says something and you're just like, oh yeah, sure, I buy in, you know.
And this is why I love the like journal club approach to making videos, where you can walk people through papers and be like, here's the scientific logical process of trying to come to these conclusions, and this is what we do as scientists, and this is why you should trust us. We've thought about it a lot. I think it's kind of a similar concept. Yeah.
And I remember seeing the funniest TikTok, which was someone doing exactly what Ben was saying, of standing in front of a graph and saying a point, and then like 15 seconds into the TikTok, he says, by the way, literally everything I said was just made up. I made up this graph. Doesn't exist. It's hard. We don't have necessarily the time or attention span to take all the information that comes to us and properly review it. And oftentimes a huge and important part of science that isn't talked about enough is a meta review of pre-existing literature, because you can always find some kind of bogus article that's been published in some international journal that was just created to make money, that with no true peer review. And it's hard when just the confidence can carry it through. And even the graph of the same data, depending upon what axes you're using, or if you're using a logarithmic scale versus a linear one, you can really skew the data to show whatever you want it to show, which is why it's really important for more scientists to, authentically and honestly go through trying to walk more people through the data with their own interpretation and try and dilute out some of the bad actors that are intentionally taking data and skewing it to suit their own interests.
Yeah, absolutely. There was that one, I think misinformation does better. Anything controversial performs better on social media. And, if you're able to manipulate a idea however you'd like and frame it in any way where it doesn't have to be factual, that's always going to be more interesting than the truth. So, but I actually, one time for fun, I made 2 videos. I made them at the exact same time of day. Like I filmed one, then filmed the next. I was wearing the same shirt, same place, same phrasing, everything. And I was like, did you know that? And I just went through a series of accurate truth statements. Like, you don't actually use 10% of your brain. That's a myth, like things like that. And then the other video, I said the opposite. Like, did you know that you only use 10% of your brain? And that it was like, I'm going to teach you 10 things you didn't know about the brain. And I posted them at the exact same time. And the one with the fake facts got like 4 times as many views. So it was a little bit of experiment, and I was going to make a follow-up video and I never did it because I felt kind of bad actually with like a video out there. All the wrong things. At the end, I did say this was all false or this was all true, but I was worried that people might have swiped away. So I ended up taking them down. But yeah, it's unfortunate, and we're kind of at a natural disadvantage.
Right. I love the conversation that we have going on. I'm really loath to cut it off, but I think between the 3 of you could probably write like a dummy's guide to science communication via social media. But I did want to make sure we had time for audience questions. And actually there was one in the chat from Arya that I think is a great one, which is, how do you guys deal with comments, both positive and negative? Anyone can start.
Should I start with that one?
Go ahead.
I'm pretty blessed, I think, that oftentimes, I think when you have a smaller community, you have a little bit more of an impact in shaping it yourself. I think that for more just absolute viral videos coming out where you have a huge influx of audience, sometimes it might feel like you don't have quite as much control over the culture of your audience, of the people watching you. So it's pretty nice that for most of the people that chat here, and I also have a really amazing moderator team that also helps keep things clean, and kind of, I think with the people that are attracted to my channel in the first place, we oftentimes create a sense of what kind of behavior is expected. And when you have inevitable trolls still coming on in, I think anytime you receive negative feedback of any sorts, there's like a 2-step process that I think I can go through. Is first like listen and see, like, is this truly something that I like did not notice earlier? Like maybe there is something that you truly haven't thought of beforehand, and you can use it as something constructive to make your content better next time, or to bring it with you. I think that filter is pretty rare. I think oftentimes with a lot of negative feedback that you receive on social media, the majority of it will just be I don't know, more like ad hominem attacks rather than like actually looking into your content. And I think it's separating out the two, that not all like negative feedback or negative comments are created equal. And just with more time on it, I think you naturally develop a thicker skin to it. Julia, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I guess I've just been thinking about how I deal with negative comments, especially the ones that they're negatively against the science that I'm presenting. So, you know, people, like I'll get anti-vaxxers on any vaccine technology videos I make, of course. And I try to look at it as an opportunity. So like, you know, the reason that I'm doing science communication on TikTok is so that I can reach these people who will think that what I'm saying is wrong, and I have the opportunity to talk to them. So first of all, I try to approach it positively and with empathy and understanding. So like, you know, I can understand why some people don't know the science, and there's lots of disinformation out there, and that's probably why they've been misled. So yeah, I will just try and like calmly explain to people who are very angry at me how I'm reasoning about things. And sometimes it actually helps. Usually I don't convert a hostile person to one who's suddenly amenable to what I'm saying. But for people that are kind of in the middle, like if I have the chance to have a dialogue with somebody in my comment section about like what I think about vaccines and what I know about the data, like sometimes I actually have been able to convince people to like get vaccinated for COVID, which is a really good feeling. Yeah, so that's definitely been a high point of the whole process. But yeah, that's what I do for negative comments. For positive ones, I try and like boost the noticeability of comments that I think are like good types of engagement, just to encourage people to do it. Like some people will kind of like ask me really good questions about the science, and I love to see those. And so I always try and answer them if they're good questions. Or yeah, if people are just excited about it, I'll always throw that a like, and it kind of helps. So yeah.
I'll just throw in really quick because we have several good questions in the chat. I get a lot of mean comments. I'm on TikTok, and that's like the garbage can of the internet. So no offense, love TikTok, but it's you put a video out, it goes to anyone. So people love to say mean things. Yeah, I just ignore them 100%. Everybody, please, if anyone ever comments anything mean on your video, just ignore it. That's my personal advice, because when I have fallen prey to those, invitations to box on the internet, I reply, or, in a comment or a DM or whatever it is. And then I just feel terrible. I ruminate, and I'm like stuck to my phone, and I can't stop thinking about it. I'm like, oh, I wonder if they replied yet. And I just can't be productive, and it's absolutely worthless. It's not worth your while. So, don't let these fools catch you slipping out here.
Yeah, I
Awesome,
think
thank
just
you
like
all.
one last 15 seconds, I think what Ben and Julia have brought up are that you can respond in a way that like best fits your own personality. I think either some people like make actually great content by engaging with their haters, and that can be really enjoyable as well. And Julia just has like an amazing heart as well for wanting to engage there. And there's also times where you can just be like, I'm going to draw my own boundary here. And I think I can do the most positive work by actually just ignoring all these hate comments here and focusing on an audience that's actually amenable to my messages. So yeah.
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you for that summary, Will. And as Ben said, we have a lot of great questions in the chat. Raja said, what ideas do you have? What ideas do you have for teaching people to be able to debunk disinformation themselves, since we don't always have you guys as sidekicks to say what's true or not?
Let's go. Want to go in the reverse order? Why don't we do that?
Let's do it.
And we can keep snaking. I always go directly to the literature. A lot of the time when people are saying false things, you will find that there is a sliver of truth to what they're saying. But in that case, it's tough, but the best case scenario is they say something and it's like the pineal gland video, where it's like, there's just no evidence for any of the stuff that she said in that video. So I actually didn't even have to really cite any literature. But, I always be careful in what you're saying. I think, that's like the big scare for a lot of scientists. It's like, I don't want to go on the internet and say something wrong and then look silly because I'm a scientist and I should know better. But, I think you do have to be careful because you could be spreading misinformation. So I kind of like pick and choose my battles. And, whenever I have like strong literature to cite, I will put it as like a green screen image behind me where it's like, here's the paper, here's what it says. And I'll also, like, just a general tip, it's helpful to kind of lay the foundation of like what the general idea is. Like, oh, maybe I should have explained like what is the pineal gland before I did in that video. So like, the average viewer understands like what we're talking about, and then clearly stating like, this is the claim that they made, and then this is why that's not true. I think that's really important too. And if you can have citations, great.
Yeah, I guess I also thought of this as coming from the perspective of like, probably a lot of the debunking of misinformation that you would do is like in regular conversation as well. So like, that's a totally different ballgame. And for that kind of thing, I think Scientists Speak Up has a really good framework for how to do that. And I think that that will probably be a big part of the thing that we do next week. So yeah, if you want to get some practice with that, definitely come learn for an hour next week.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, Julia. Next week, we'll be doing that workshop on it. I think when it comes to also, a lot of times when you're fighting misinformation, especially science misinformation, something that we talked about in our dismantling disinformation workshop for Scientists Speak Up is that fighting with the science and fighting with the facts sometimes might even be ineffective as well. Where when someone wants to believe a certain way, defending it with the literature might not even be an effective way to convince them, because there'll always be another source they'll point to, and maybe they'll say, well, I don't trust that journal, I trust instead CNN, Fox News, whatever news source I'm pointing to, that will be layers apart from that. So something that might be helpful is to, as Julie was saying earlier, approach it with a position of empathy, and think about, like, why is the person arguing the point that they think? Like, where do their values lie? And if you can start with Ben's strategy of starting with finding common ground, all of his videos, even when he's disagreeing, he starts with the common ground that he finds. And I think the first thing that you can do is just disarm some of the tension in that situation and in that confrontation, and first start with, like, where do we agree on, where you start on the common points, and then see more of, like, talking about, like, where are your fears, and maybe we can talk more about your fears and validating those, rather than necessarily just, like, bonking you each time for, like, every misfact and things like that.
Awesome, thank you, Ollie. I think, yeah, I read something yesterday that lines up really well with that, which was to not assume that someone is brainwashed, and always assume that there's a reason for what they're doing. Let's see. This might be a useful question for anyone, for other students who are considering joining you guys on the big stage. Timon asks, how do you guys balance between your studies, well-being, social life, and creating content? And if I can also add a bit of, like, do you guys have any advice for maybe an easy way to ramp up? Like, if you don't have the time to like dedicate to a full account, or in the case of Ben, 4 accounts, what are other ways that you can sort of engage in this sort of sphere? And we can go, I guess, the reverse of what we did before.
Yeah, I think my Twitch channel is maybe a better example of engaging, but having my account not fully be science oriented. Like, for my account, I'll spend some time gaming or doing just all sorts of other variety of things. And I think sometimes, of course, to maximize growth in an algorithm, having a TikTok account that has a singular focus might be the most effective towards building an audience. But I think it also goes to show that within your whatever pages that you exist on, spending a little bit of time to just talk about the things that you're passionate about. I think first and foremost, people are attracted to passion and attracted to people that are putting their time into the things that they're really interested in and sharing those interests around. So I think without making a dedicated account towards science or debunking misinformation, with whatever platforms you already exist on, that could be a great space for you to get some practice in that. And who knows, if it ends up gaining a lot of outside interest, then that might be the time to pull a Ben and spin off 4 accounts dedicated towards that science.
Yeah, how to get involved with this without having your own account is something I've been thinking about a lot, because I think it would be amazing if every scientist had their own social media account and made videos about what they know all the time, but obviously that's not feasible. And I think that there are a ton of scientists out there who would be able to communicate really effectively about their field if they just had the outlet for it. And so I'm kind of interested in trying to make my channel a little bit into that by having other people on. So if anybody is interested in talking about their field, contact me. And then I'm also thinking about maybe like making a separate account, maybe with Scientists Speak Up on like that would allow a bunch of Stanford scientists to speak out. So yeah, that's one way. But yeah, in terms of just like how I balance what I do with my actual job and well-being, it becomes hard sometimes. Definitely social media takes a backseat to most of the other stuff that I need to do or want to do social life and well-being wise. I try not to put too much pressure on myself and just say like, hey, if I need to take like a month off from this, it's okay. Like people aren't going to unfollow me. It's fine. So yeah, I'd say, you know, at a certain point, you can kind of take breaks when you need to, but definitely there's kind of like a critical point in the beginning where you have to just like keep pumping out content in order to like get people to know who you are and follow you. So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think a lot of people worry, like, you know, whenever you Google, like, how do I get TikTok famous? If you Google something like that, how do I go viral? It's like consistency. You need to post 20 times a week. That's literally like TikTok says. They encourage like 4 to 5 posts a day. Okay. As a scientist, that's never going to happen unless you're spreading misinformation, because you can't research that quickly. So, and for a while when I started, I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to keep up with this? I don't think you have to post that much. I really, I've experimented. I'm a scientist. I've experimented a little bit with the algorithm and the platform, and I found that if I don't post for a month versus if I'm posting every single day, it's all like individual video based. So don't feel like you have to go on and post 20 videos a day. You can do 1 video a month, or you can just whatever. And I think, like Will said too, you don't have to talk about science to start. You can start by showing everyone that you're capable of doing 6 backflips in a row and get viral for that. And then all of a sudden you're becoming an ally for science when you're talking about it. And I think we actually need more people that are not scientists talking about science as much as we need scientists talking about it.
Yeah, Julie brought up such a good point earlier as well, which is like collaboration is key. If you don't necessarily have the platform, I guarantee you there's always like someone on campus or around you that's somewhat social media famous in some way. And so collaborations, I think, are so key, and also growth, as well as like sharing good messages out there. So big agree with Julie on there. And if anyone else wants to talk about their own science, I think podcasts are like super hip these days, and I would love to have you on my stream as well.
Yeah, we are really looking forward to your podcast. Well, I am personally, yeah, I've been waiting for months since you first brought up that topic. So we're at the end of the hour. So if you have any more questions, I'm sure our panelists would be happy to take them at their TikTok handles and things like that. And just to round us off on a high note, I was wondering if you guys could share sort of like a high point, like the highest point you can think of in your career so far as science communicators on social media.
I could do that quickly. I think that I personally really underestimated the number of opportunities that would become available by getting on science communication. Since I assume everyone in here is scientists, coolest thing that happened to me was that a research foundation called the Mind Science Foundation contacted me and said, hey, we fund scientists, like we fund research, and we host this competition where you have to explain your research. You submit a grant and then you explain it in 7 minutes or less. And we think you'd be very competitive for it because you're so, concise in your TikToks that it might be a good fit for you. And so they literally invited me to apply, and I ended up getting it. So I got $30,000 in research funds that I'm now using to fund my postdoc partially. So, so don't wave a stick at TikTok. It can actually help your scientific career.
That's incredible. That's so good. Julie, do you want to take this next?
Sure, yeah. I guess, yeah, I can't think of like a single specific instance of a great thing that happened, but I guess kind of along a similar vein, it's just been a really great networking opportunity. Like I've made some really cool friends through TikTok that I never would have met otherwise. And, not all of them are scientists. Like I've met Ben is super cool. But I've also met, people who do like personal finance TikTok and stuff. And if you just like have a big TikTok, you can kind of just meet other TikTokers somehow. And yeah, that's been really fun and interesting.
Yeah, I think for Twitch, it was really cool meeting some amazing people. I know growing up, one of my like big role models was, or someone that I watched all the time, was Ryan Higa, who made the videos like how to be ninja or how to be gangsta. and he ended up like streaming on Twitch as well. And so I got to meet him and play games with him. Also with Kevin Wu, Kev Jumba as well. So those were like really cool experiences. But most recently, high schoolers from Gunn High School discovered my Twitch channel and invited me for a TEDx talk to talk about my experiences with teaching beforehand and now going into research at Stanford. So I'm really excited about that. I think that's coming up shortly, but it might be postponed because of Omicron right now. So we'll see what happens there, but excited for that. Sometimes at the end of my streams, it feels like a little TED Talk. So now I get to actually say thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
And thank you very much for giving that TED Talk to all three of our panelists. Yeah, so let's give a massive round of applause to our panelists, and thank you for bearing with us through the technical difficulties in the beginning.
Yay, thank you guys so much. And can we pull up maybe everyone's handles again, just so everyone can know where to follow our panelists? And then, as we mentioned, thank you for, I didn't pay Julia to say it, but next week at the same time and same place, we're going to have a workshop on using social media to debunk misinformation. So it'll start with a little intro based off of the debunking handbook. So the people who saw Will's Twitch stream will have a head start on that. And then we'll go into breakout rooms and people will get to work with these experts as well as a few others on actually developing their own content, so their own debunkings of scientific misinformation. So if you want to register, that's at tinyurl.com/SSU-debunk. And Vivian is dropping people's handles in the chat. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you for having us. This is a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. I'm sorry I'm sitting here in the dark, all awkward.
Yeah, this was super fun. Definitely do something like this again.
All right, thank you all. I will now, and actually I don't know. I have one end button and I don't know what happens if I'm gonna click it, so I'll do that now.